I want to welcome you all to the USIBC monthly e-commerce working group meeting. Today, we're really pleased to have two really insightful briefings around the e-commerce space. First, we have a team that's going to share a little bit around the new GST rules on mobile gaming from one of our knowledge partners, Catan and Company. I see BN Vivek is going to lead that conversation along with Ankar Sharma. I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, to pull up your own slides and roll them. If you have any problems, more than happy to do that. In addition, we have the team from, I guess, from Dr. Gopala Krishnan, who led a study on WTO study on MSMEs and how the digital economy has impacted them. And following our conversation on GST, Dr. Gopala Krishnan, I'll hand it over to you and you could introduce your team, which includes Christine Bliss and perhaps others that are going to share some insights on that. This conversation is going to be recorded. We will have questions and answers. So if you have any questions, do raise your hand or put them into the chat. We'll be more than happy to capture them. And with that, I'm going to hand over the virtual microphone over to you, BN and team, to give us a quick update. So over to you, sir.
Thanks so much, Jay. So like always, we have a short update on e-commerce, which have happened over the course of the last month. We don't have any significant update in terms of the e-commerce policy itself, but what we do have today is a significant update that's come up in the form of GST Council recommendations on online gaming. And we have today our partner, Onkar Sharma, who focuses on indirect taxes, and he would be best placed to answer these questions and also take a briefing on this subject matter. Over to you, Onkar.
Hi, thank you, Vivek, thank you, Jacob. Good evening, everyone. So very recently, like a week before, the GST Council in India, which is the apex body to make a recommendation as to how GST in India has to be levied and structured around supplies, they came up with a recommendation stating that now we are going to tax online gaming at the rate of 28% on the entire bet value or the prize money. So that is a recommendation which has been given by the GST Council. Vivek, can you go to the next slide?
Can you put the slides into full screen mode, please?
If you are on mute.
You're on mute, BN.
Sorry, I thought it was on full screen. Let me just do that again, please.
So just to give you a brief overview as to what is the present taxation structure in India when it comes to online gaming. Presently, the tax is only levied. Can you go to the first slide?
Sure.
Yeah. So presently, tax is only levied on the platform fee which is collected by a gaming company. So what is the present position is that a gaming company does not own the prize money, does not have any involvement with the prize money. It only merely provides a platform where two people can come and play the game being hosted there. If supplies, if any, are being made, is between the two people or n number of people who are playing games, and the supply is the intersay between them. Gaming company has nothing to do with the supply. It is merely facilitating the game. And for this facilitation, the gaming company collects a particular fee from the prize money. And therefore, and that is the service they are providing, the service of facilitation to their players. And it is that service on which GST is levied. So presently, I will come back to the overview of the recommendation, but let's see the impact first. So existing, let's understand if the pot value is rupees 100 or in any currency, say 100 USD, then a platform fee of 10% or 10 USD is collected. Presently, GST is paid on this 10 USD, which is collected as a platform fee, say at the rate of 18%. So the GST is 1.8 USD. Now, assuming that there are two players playing on the platform with a contribution of $50 each, which makes the prize money of 100, then what is the profit of that player? Is 100 minus 10 minus 1.8 GST and minus the 50 contribution he has already made. So his profit is 38.2. So this is the present taxation structure. Now, what the GST Council has recommended, let's see on the left side of the screen. They have said that we will include online gaming in the same category as betting, horse racing, and lottery is presently being treated under GST. Now, at present also, on horse racing, betting and gambling and lottery, GST is payable on the total value of the prize money, which is not the case with the online gaming companies. Why this difference? The basic argument for this difference is that the games which are being played online, some of the games, say as rummy or poker, we say these are games of skill. Whereas lottery or something which has to do with betting and gambling are a game of chance. And hence there is a differential tax structure. Now, what they are trying to do is do away with this differentiation. So they are saying we are not concerned whether the game being played is a game of chance or a game of skill. And therefore, we will we will merge these categories and we'll call it online gaming. And as far as the game is being played online, there will be a tax of 28% on what? On the entire prize money. That is what they have done to the online gaming industry. And what it has, the impact of this in numerical form is there on the right side of the screen. Now, going forward, what will happen? If the pot value or the prize money is 100 USD, then again, platform fee is 10 USD. Now they are saying we will charge GST at the rate of 28% on the entire pot value on 100. So the tax will be 28 USD. What is the increase in tax? It's from 1.8 to 28 USD, which is approximately 1500%. And that denudes the profit of the winning player by 69%. He's only left with 12 USD, whereas earlier he would have been left with 38.2. So that is the impact this particular recommendation will have when it comes into force. Now we have now seen what the problem is. Now what is the way forward? So now it is only a recommendation. Still, it has not become law in India. So this recommendation to become law, there are various steps which has to be followed. So there will be amendments in the CGST Act or the statute which governs the GST law, which will be tabled before the Indian Parliament. They will pass the amendment. Since India has a federal structure, these amendments will also need to be ratified by the state legislatures. So there is a long process which will be undertaken before this recommendation is actually implemented. Given this long drawn process, what is the way forward for the Indian government and the gaming industry? What the Indian government is now saying through, in the media is that this is merely clarificatory. They are saying it was always existent in the law. This is nothing new which we are bringing. Why they are saying this? Because they want to tax the past as well. Now, what is the repercussion if they do that? The repercussion is the gaming company's profit is 10 rupees, whereas the tax payable is 28 rupees. So while the gaming companies would have earned 10, from where will they pay 28 rupees when they don't have that money? And that is the precise reason there was a notice which was quashed by the Karnataka High Court in the matter of Gamescraft Technologies. And we were the ones who were representing them before the Karnataka High Court. It was a 21,000 crore notice. It ran into billion. And they said they wanted to recover that. The Karnataka High Court said that presently the taxation structure is not such that you can levy 28% on the prize money. At the present, given the taxation structure and your transaction, gaming companies are only liable to pay tax on the platform fee being collected by them. So whatever they are doing right now is completely correct. So therefore, the government is trying to bring in this tone that this is clarificatory so that they can go and challenge this judgment before the Supreme Court and try and tax the past. Now, what is the way forward for the gaming industry? The gaming industry, therefore, now since the recommendation has come, and prior to the recommendation being given, there were representation which were made to the GST Council and various other bodies, Finance Ministry, Ministry of Information Technologies. But as unlucky as it could be, this recommendation has fallen from the GST Council. Now they are they are visiting the state governments because they will also play a very important role in bringing this recommendation because they will have to ratify the amendments which are made to this statute. So they are going and making representation to the state government to explain the fallacy of this. If this 28% tax comes, then the entire gaming industry will be out of business in India. And why so? Because nowhere in the entire world, except for Germany, the tax or GST or VAT is collected on the entire price value. Even when it is there in Germany, the rate at which it is collected is minuscule as compared to 28%. It's somewhere around 1.5% to 2%. So therefore, that is why saying that all the players will then move to foreign online gaming platforms, and they no more will be playing on the online gaming platforms being maintained by Indian gaming industry. So that's one. Then there are other arguments in form of that it is unconstitutional. It is against the spirit of the Indian Constitution. So it will be amenable to challenge before a higher court in India. So this is basically what is happening. We still have to see whether the recommendation is implemented actually into the statute or not and how it shapes us. So we'll keep you updated on further proceedings in this matter. For the time being, this is where we are. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Onkar. Really appreciate it. And BN, if you could stop sharing your screen, that would be great. Thank you. And I'm also going to invite, so let's have a quick question here. So Onkar, so a question for you. One, so assuming this passes, do all of the Indian states need to approve it, or is it some majority, right? So any one state could put a stop to this. Okay.
Right.
So
even if one state puts it, then there will be a differential levy of GST vis-a-vis that state. So that will destroy the entire concept of GST, wherein one tax is to be levied throughout India.
Okay. So that's quite a major hurdle. Now, the second thing you said to me, and I wasn't really clear on this. You said that, and obviously this would negatively impact the Indian gaming environment. And you said platforms would move from India potentially to other jurisdictions. But would not the GST continue to apply on Indian citizens? And those international companies would be on the hook to collect it? Or would it just not happen and it would fall under the radar?
I will tell you,
for smaller gaming companies.
Under Indian GST law, there is a provision wherein Indian government can tax foreign companies as well. What is the issue is the enforceability of such kind of a levy. So the levy says, so there is a concept of OIDAR. It's online database access and retrieval service. So if any Indian is accessing anything online and downloading or playing a game, then whatever payment he's making towards that is leviable to GST irrespective of who is providing it and from where. And the law says that that company who is providing such a service of making available the database or the games to Indian citizen, he is liable to come to India and register in India and pay tax.
Okay, thank you.
So which becomes unenforceable because the Indian government does not have an extraterritorial jurisdiction.
Right. So obviously larger gaming companies would tend to comply, smaller gaming companies may or may not. Does this cover any other services, in-purchase apps, or a lot of games are free but then have other opportunities for revenue? Does it impact any of those, or is it purely okay, go ahead, sir.
It does. It does impact the in-app purchases as well. So, the Indian valuation mechanism under GST is such that it will try and value even if it is a non-monetary consideration. So if you and I are playing a game and the consideration is that whatever skins I have, whatever, tools I have, that will get transferred to you if you win this game, then they will try and value those tools, take out the monetary value and then put a GST on it.
Okay.
So depending upon the kind of transaction, GST may be leviable, may impact that also.
Great, thank you. I also want to see if any of the other members or anyone else has any other questions. I have one more question for you. If not, do raise your hand or put them into the chat. So, Onkar, one final question before we move to Christine and company. A lot of online activities maybe are not directly monetary. They are affinity programs or other types of advertising that might have some secondary monetary implication. Is this purely on monetary transactions, or would it cover things like gifts or affinity awards and other things like that?
Mostly, if those awards are towards online gaming, it may get covered. So if you are organizing an online game and you ask players to come and play and then you keep a prize valued money to it, then on that prize money GST would be payable.
Okay.
It will cover that as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate your time. I don't see any other questions from our membership. Let me thank you for putting together these slides. We'll share them with our members. BN, thank you for organizing this on behalf of Catan and Company. With that, I'd like to move to the second portion of our conversation. And I would invite Christine to give us an introduction of what she and her team have been doing with the WTO, and also kick it off and open up the slides when appropriate, and then we'll go from there. Thank you, Christine and Dr. Gopalakrishnan. We're really pleased to have you on our platform. And with that, Christine, over to you, ma'am.
Thanks so much, Jacob, and to USIBC. We really appreciate the work that you do, and really the opportunity to present Badri's study, which we think is a really important one. Just to set the stage, I'm Christine Bliss, president of the Coalition of Services Industries, which is a U.S. trade association, which some of you may be familiar with. We represent a broad spectrum of U.S. services and digital industries, from ICT, financial services, entertainment, distribution, logistics, professional services. And we represent them on trade and investment issues, bilaterally, regionally, multilaterally. In the context of the WTO, we've been extremely involved over the years. We've been around for over 40 years. And the issue specifically we're here to talk about today relates to something that was agreed to in 1998, which was a political commitment to not impose customs duties. And I think this is important to understand. We're not talking about taxes. We're talking about the imposition of custom duties on electronic cross-border electronic transmissions. Now, this political commitment has been extended by members at every ministerial since 1998. India raised some concerns, I would say, beginning in the mid-2000s, but basically the concerns they raised seemed to have more to do with the leverage they saw in giving and lending their support to the continuation of the moratorium on customs duties, not so much to the substance. And the bargain that was made was basically that WTO members agreed to extend what was a moratorium on the bringing of cases for non-violation under the TRIPS agreement, which was and still is an important issue to India and other developing countries. Now, that practice continued until and through 2017. In 2017, however, Indonesia, South Africa, and India all raised objections to the continuation of the moratorium. And the basic argument they made was that as a result of the moratorium and the inability to impose duties on electronic transmissions, developing countries were losing billions of dollars in tax revenue. And they relied on a study that was done by an economist that worked for UNCTAD. It was not an official UNCTAD study, but they relied on the study nonetheless. At that time, US companies, certainly CSI, but also our colleagues in the Global Services Coalition, which I co-chair, and that's an association of other services associations around the world. There are about 12 of us that in Europe, Asia, Latin America. We commissioned Dr. Badri and also his associate at that time, Dr. Lee Bankiyama from ESIP, to do a study on what the actual costs were from the imposition of duties on electronic transmissions. And that ESIP study, along with one done by the OECD, found that in fact there was much more for developing countries and economies to lose than to be gained by the imposition of duties on electronic transmissions. The moratorium was then extended through 2017 and the subsequent two ministerials. But at MC12, there became a real question where it was extended, but it was extended on the condition that there be a dedicated work program in the eCommerce WTO work program to really look at developing country concerns with regard to the lack of ability to impose duties on electronic transmissions. And chiefly what developing countries were arguing, one is robbing them of revenue, and this was due to the fact that the ability of more goods to be transmitted electronically, digitally, and particularly because of the advent of 3D printing. Two, they began to argue a new argument, and that was that they just needed the policy space, and they wanted the ability to impose duties in order to develop their own industries, which was a different argument. And there was also an argument about what the scope of this really means. Does it cover just the bits and bytes, the electronic transmission, or does it cover the content that's included in that cross-border electronic transmission? That debate continues today, although the generally understood understanding is that electronic transmission covers not only the electricity, the bits and bytes, but also the content that's covered. Where we are today is that as this debate has raged, it has become clear that this is not just a big tech issue and something that will affect and that big tech companies care about. It's really an issue that is going to very adversely affect small businesses if the e-commerce moratorium ends. And that's really the reason why the Global Services Coalition commissioned Dr. Badri Narayan Gopalakrishnan to do this study for us, to really look for the first time at Indian SMEs and see what the impact would be if India were to start to collect custom duties on electronic transmissions. I will note that the OECD has also done a study which was recently released to the WTO, similarly, but it's broader and covers countries in addition to India. But what's so important about Dr. Badri's study is it really gives the Indian government in particular and the private sector hard evidence as to why it's really not in their policy interest to go forward with the imposition of duties, particularly because of the negative effects on productivity and on job growth on small businesses in India. And with that introduction, and I appreciate, Jacob, you allowing me to just make a few minutes of introduction so that we didn't just go cold into the study, because I think the background is very important for those who haven't been involved in this in the WTO context. So with that, let me turn things over to you, Dr. Badri, and present your excellent study, which we have distributed to WTO members and also the private sector, but we're happy to provide this to any of your members who don't have it and to any others that you think should be receiving it. So with that, over to you.
Thank you very much, Christine, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Jacob, for including us for in the agenda of this today's meeting. Again, please excuse me for my bad throat. I'm traveling now and got slightly sick on my throat. But it's a great pleasure to present the study that we recently released. It's funded by GST and USIBC, as Christian rightly said. And we formed a consortium of Indian researchers who we all work together, and I was happy to lead this project. Like the previous study, which we did a few years ago, we focused on a hypothetical scenario of an increase in or imposition of custom duties on cross-border digital transmissions. Instead of taking that kind of a hypothetical approach, we actually wanted to look at like kind of step back and see what has been the contribution of the cross-border digital transmissions on the micro, small, and medium enterprises in India. So we have a lot of different think tanks and even some of the government institutions, and I myself have an affiliation with Niti Aayog as a fellow. It is honorary, but nevertheless, I was heading trade and commerce there before, and I was also involved in a lot of these conversations within the government, which I still get involved. So it's kind of an effort by several leading think tanks in India. I can see the names here. But let me, before getting into the details, I'll get to the kind of the bottom line. What is the study all about? Christina has already set a stage here. It's all about the custom duties that might be imposed on the cross-border digital transmissions if the moratorium goes away. I hope, yeah. So in this context, the Indian government has been in a kind of dilemma. There are this leverage points that Christine mentioned, where India wants to continue the moratorium, but then India also wants something in return for that. So that is one aspect. But that kind of leverage point makes sense only if this is neutral for India, this whole moratorium. But what we find in this study is that if you are concerned about the micro, small, and medium enterprises, which are huge contributor to the India's GDP, particularly in terms of employment, because a lot of focus today in India is about generating jobs. So now, in the recent past, if you take, last few years, particularly after COVID, but even before that, the digital services have been a huge input into the Indian micro, small, and medium enterprises. A lot of, smartphone-based apps have been used, like WhatsApp, Facebook, and a lot of different tools are being used. So digital sector has been an important part of the MSMEs. So in this context, what we did a very detailed kind of quantitative analysis. I wouldn't get into the technical details of it, but these are the broad things that we found here. We found that every 1% increase in the digital service imports as inputs for producing different things by MSMEs accounted for like 0.4 to 0.8% increase in employment, 0.1 to 0.2% increase in value added, gross value added, and 0.04 to 0.08% increase in productivity, labor productivity, which is basically value added per employee. So we did a very detailed analysis that led to these results. Then we also did a lot of stakeholder discussions. We talked to some MSMEs themselves from different parts of India. We also talked to some of the government officials. We also spoke to industry associations, and we came up with some inferences there. But broad inferences there are like, if these import custom duties are imposed, they will first of all increase the business costs, and second, they are going to be difficult to implement. So if really the aim is to protect the domestic digital service providers, and if you want to develop capacity there, we can also do that directly rather than making the imports more expensive. So that is one thing that came up from our discussion. Of course, we do use a lot of government sources from the national census and national sample surveys. We also use some of the international data sets, because for digital services imports, we use the OECD data. We also use some of the ADB data sets, and we also cross-check that with the Indian data sets. And we use a lot of econometric methods like panel data regressions for this, and we also did some interviews. So the objectives are to assess the impact of these digital imports on three aspects of MSMEs: value added, employment, and productivity, and also conduct these stakeholder interviews. In India, to this audience, particularly the Indian part of the audience, I don't actually have to define what is MSME. There are some thresholds that are defined on who are MSMEs in terms of investment and in terms of turnover. Now, in terms of electronic transmissions, there are a wide range of things included there, but very broadly, we can say these are the digital transactions that happen from one country to another. It can be electronic content, it can be e-commerce related services, and the digitally enabled transactions. Not the goods part. The goods part is captured separately, but the associated services. And these are some of the definitions of the data sets we use. We have the output, which is the total value of production. We look at it at sector level, different sectors within MSMEs. Inputs also, we look at different sectors. We look at gross value added, which is basically output minus intermediate inputs. And then we also have employment. We look at these different years. We start from 1999, 2000, and we go until 2015-16. We look at a wide range of data sets, and I can keep talking about all the technical things involved here for like an hour or two. I'll just move forward and directly come to some exploratory analysis and then the results. As a lot of people here who are familiar with the Indian MSME sector, you would all probably agree with me in saying that the MSMEs have been going through some kind of a decline in absolute terms in the last few years. You can see that here from 2000, from 2001 to 2006-07, there was an increase, but after that there has been a steady decrease, both in terms of input and in terms of output. In terms of if you compare the digital imports, what is happening to digital imports and the gross value added, there is an almost one-on-one positive correlation. So the digital imports increases and the gross value added also increases. There is a small discrepancy that happened in the recent past, but other than that, it's almost like a straight line kind of association. Now I'll come to these technical coefficients that we have here. In all these econometrics that we did a lot of different robustness, sensitivity analysis, but basically I would want to draw your attention to this particular variable, digital imports. So the digital imports, when you see a star, that means the effects are statistically significant. As many stars you see, as much is the strength of the significance. So basically, even if you have one star, that is sufficient to say that the significance is really strong. If you see 3 stars, that is like super strong. So you see that the effect of digital imports on gross value added ranges anywhere between 0.1 to 0.2. So that's the range of contribution of digital imports to the gross value added. If you look at productivity or value addition per employee, it is actually anywhere between 0.4 to 0.8, 0.04 to 0.08, and employment is the strongest. We see anywhere between 0.4 and 0.8 whenever it is significant. So basically, from all these things, what we get is the thing that I mentioned earlier. But instead of repeating this, what I want to say is that policymakers try really hard to increase output, and we want to increase employment. We also want to increase productivity. But here we see a situation where you can increase all of them. As economist, I would say that there is a trade-off. When you increase productivity, you're going to employ fewer people, but you're going to have greater output. But it's kind of in macroeconomics, in a different context, we have this term called impossible trinity. So you cannot have all these three things happening at the same time: higher employment, higher productivity, higher output. But here is a situation where we see that the digital services imports are so positive for the MSMEs that it can lead to increase in all three. You have greater productivity, and because of greater productivity, you produce more, and because you produce more, you also employ more, and irrespective of the increase in productivity, you're able to employ more people, because typically when you're becoming more productive, you employ less people, fewer people. So that is another important thing I want to highlight. The MSMEs, for them, all that matters. I mean, they actually are not at all part of these conversations, right? So they are not being consulted for all these policy decisions. Most of these decisions happen at the Department of Commerce, and some discussions between Niti Aayog and some other line ministries. But at the end of the day, people who are involved in these discussions are industry associations and maybe some large companies, but the really micro, small, and medium enterprises are not involved. So they're not even aware of a lot of these things. But then when we really tell them what does it mean, for example, if you're using WhatsApp, it's in some ways it's a foreign, it's a cross-border digital transmission, because there is a Facebook cloud that's going to be involved there and so on. So they are going to pay some custom duties if moratorium goes away. So then they realize, okay, that is anything that is going to cost us more is going to be, something we cannot live with, because we are living on very thin margins. So we cannot actually, work with anything that is going to increase our costs. But they are definitely saying that they have become more and more dependent on digital services and digital services imports. So that is one thing. They have a very positive outlook on digital services contribution to their own bottom line, and they want to make sure that that should continue. And they are, like all Indian citizens, they want more and more domestic players there, but they don't want to bear any increase in costs for that. Similarly, even the government of India friends that we discussed with, they said that the complaints cost is high, so that's a difficult thing. And actually, one important thing that even I think Jacob mentioned on the chat is India is a major player in the global digital exports. So if this moratorium goes away, it's not a question of imports by India being curtailed. It's also more a question of India's digital exports being affected. And that also is something in the thought process of government of India, that no, if do you really want to force our exporters to be affected? So industry associations also discussed about some of these issues, and basically they are of an opinion that the MSMEs are not yet using the advanced products, but still there are a lot of digital products being used. But again, their question is more about they feel like they kind of don't care if these tariffs are imposed, but they do understand that it's going to if it is going to happen in a big way, it's going to affect their bottom line, their costs. So they're actually worried about the compliance costs and the increase in tariffs and so on. And when we talk to some of the think tanks, we got some interesting points like there has to be more and more involvement in terms of capacity development, in terms of government contribution to MSMEs move forward in terms of digital technologies. We also have to look at cross-border digital transmissions led by the MSMEs, not only them being on the receivers end as an input, but also they have to be, we have to promote a lot of micro multinational corporations, micro and like MSMEs being part of the global corporations. So basically, our conclusion is very simple. Like this moratorium has been really helpful for the MSMEs. So we have to basically, continue the moratorium. India has to support that if we are concerned about the MSMEs. And it's not just a big tech issue like Christine also mentioned. But of course, we understand that our data, our analytics is very challenging because MSME data is not that well captured in India. But then, as you saw, we did multiple models, we did multiple data parameters, and we have done a very robust sensitivity analysis, and we are very confident with the results that we got. Of course, we have done a lot of outreach activities. We have shared this with the government officials and also private sector stakeholders who are part of the discussions on moratorium. We discussed in detail with Her Excellency Director General Dr. Ngozi of WTO, and she's also very supportive, and she's looking forward to India's positive contribution here. We published this report. You're all welcome to read that and provide us comments. We also have a press release about it, summarizing the study. And we are actually working on many more policy briefs because, as you can see, there are many institutions involved here, like Trade Promotion Council of India that comes under Department of Commerce, and we have NCAR, we have CSEP, and so on. We are going to come up with a wide range of policy briefs because there's a lot of this, a very comprehensive study. So we are going to take different parts of the study and highlight in smaller, shorter policy briefs. And we already published a G20, T20 policy brief, in which, of course, you all know India is chairing it, and we have, included well-known co-authors like Dr. Harshvardhan Singh, was the former Deputy Director General of WTO. And we might also publish this in as an academic study. We all like policy briefs, policy studies, because that's easier for the larger, set of audience. But we also have to publish it in academic journals so that it's known as a rigorous study. So that's broad set of observations I wanted to share. And you're welcome to ask any questions, and maybe we can have deeper discussions and greater details on the study whenever needed. So thank you once again.
Well, great. Thank you, Dr. Gopalakrishnan. If you could stop sharing your slides, that'll be great. Thank you. We'll start with some questions and answers. Samir, I know that you pinged me and you have a question to ask Dr. Gopalakrishnan. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jay. Hi, Badri. Thank you so much for the comprehensive details. I just wanted to ask you, like, how receptive is the government of India to your suggestions? Have you done any interfacing with them, and do you have any updates to that extent?
Yeah, thanks, Samir, for the question. Yeah, definitely. I had, in fact, I was part of the preparation for ministerial conference last year, being part of NITI, and NITI Aayog has been very equivocally supporting the moratorium, and moratorium is just one part, but in general, India's positive contribution to the WTO discussions. That has been our message to the Commerce Ministry, starting from our Vice Chairman to CEO to at my level as an advisor. We all made that very clear, and we did play a role in making sure that the moratorium continued, last year. And now, as in my capacity as a researcher and economist, I'm still continuing that effort. And I had a lot of discussions with Department of Commerce, the people who are in charge, the Joint Secretary who is in charge was my colleague, Mr. Darpan Jain, and others. and they are actually, I mean, the study has been kind of influential because they were in kind of two minds as to whether this whole request is just for the larger companies and what is the big deal about the smaller enterprises. So the moment we were able to show this with hard evidence, they're actually quite, positive on this. But we still have a lot of work to do because, as you know, Indian government is a very complex web of linkages and mechanisms we have, and we have the ambassador for commerce for Indian government at WTO, who, as far as I can see, is still our mission there is still not supporting the moratorium very openly and positively. But within the Ministry of Commerce, there are more positive changes. So we are continuing to we're trying to continue this momentum. I'll be soon, visiting India for a mission with Niti and some of the work I'm doing on Vision 2047 and so on with the Vice Chairman. So I'll take the opportunity to meet the Honorable Commerce Minister and discuss in detail. And so we're trying to keep pushing this, and need multiple levels of pushing in different directions. So I would also welcome any contributions from the group here to take this study and move this forward. But the short answer is, I would say yes and no. Yes, in terms of, I mean, definitely this study is making some impact. People are looking at it, but of course, there are always naysayers and like our friend who did the Untitled study, she's also still very actively, acting against this. So we have a lot of different things happening simultaneously, but we are trying our best, and we need more discussions, more debates, more contributions to happen to the commerce, more representations probably to happen here, because I think the stakeholder consultations have not been done so much on this area. So that is why this study is kind of a substitute for that, because we did the stakeholder consultations ourselves. But I think the audience here also, I would request you to submit more representations to Department of Commerce. Maybe you're welcome to reference to the study also, provide reference to the study also. So thank you. I hope I answered your question. Probably it's not a clear answer because we still have a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Thank you. So that was my follow-up question, actually, like how exactly can our members or general public, like the government in these matters? If you can just shed some light on that.
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to do is to probably send a mail or a letter to formal letter to the Department of Commerce saying that how important it is to support this moratorium, and you're not talking as just like some kind of lobbying thing, but it's something like based on academic research and evidence. So I think it will be great to do that effort, because that I feel like in our own stakeholder discussions we came to a kind of a conclusion. You can see in the study also that the awareness is not there among the industry members, apart from the stakeholders. I mean, direct stakeholders. Everyone is a stakeholder actually. All the MSMEs, everyone is a stakeholder here. But apart from the direct digital service providers, others have not been so much involved. So I think more and more representations from your end to people like Dr. Balaji, who takes care of a lot of WTO related work for the Ministry of Commerce. He's a joint secretary there, and Mr. Darpan Jain, who looks at services trade overall. So I'll be very delighted if some of the representations can go there. Of course, we know we are also directly working with them, talking to them, but they know our views, so they know that we have been doing this for a while and we have been working on it. But also from the industry, if you can get more and more representation, that would be great. I would really welcome it.
Can I just jump in and add? I absolutely agree with everything that Badri has said. A huge contribution, and I know this is very, very difficult, but one of the points that continues to be made in Geneva by the proponents of continuing the moratorium is this extent to which we could put a human face on this, from the MSME angle, the better. I don't know whether it would be possible to identify a couple of Indian MSMEs that might be willing to actually be quoted and used as examples, or at least association heads. But that I think would be huge if we could actually get them on the record and get that disseminated in the WTO. I think that would be very, very helpful because that we have heard from the WTO ambassadors and from Dr. Ngozi herself that is something that's very useful. So to the extent USIBC might be helpful to encourage, again, maybe because of anonymity, people would be more comfortable if it's an association head as opposed to an individual company. But that could be incredibly useful.
Thank you, Christine.
Great.
I think that's a great suggestion. Yeah.
We have a few ideas, Christine, we can take those offline. Are there any
Okay.
questions or comments from anyone else on the call? I have one final question. I guess a lot of people, when you think about e-commerce and customs, there's this sense that it's merchandise. Does your study and does the moratorium also cover things like digital services?
Yes.
Or is it purely, it does? And is the real impact on some of your study is that other countries would presumably place counter tariffs if India had tariffs and there'd be some sort of matching, or is it just on the tariffs, on the customs itself?
So in this particular study, we take a very ex post analysis kind of approach. So we don't get into any hypothetical scenarios. We say that in the past 15, 20 years, what has been the contribution of digital services imports on the MSMEs? So that has been our question. And all the numbers that we quote are actually based on what has happened in India, not what might happen in the future. But definitely, if the digital services imports 1% increase leads to 0.8% increase in gross value out of MSMEs, that's saying a lot. That also, and from a counterfactual or hypothetical perspective, that means that if your tariffs are going to reduce the digital services imports by 1%, then it is quite likely that your gross value added of MSMEs are going to get reduced by 0.8%. So it's kind of symmetric. So whatever we say as the positive contribution of moratorium would also hold for negative contribution of removal of moratorium. But we don't actually explicitly take into account the export side of it. So I mean, that is what we did in the the previous study that Christine was talking about. There we had this hypothetical scenario of other countries retaliating in this kind of a global trade war of in terms of services, digital services, and so on. Here we talk more from a kind of contribution of imports in the MSME. So I think we did not explicitly talk about the digital service exports by the MSMEs and what would happen to them in the other countries. So that part we did not explicitly cover, but it's kind of implicitly there.
Well, thank you. And that's perhaps a good follow-on area of analysis to consider as well. I just also want to note for our participants in the chat, I dropped in some recent statements from the WTO lead, along with some recent data that I find incredibly interesting. Buried in the data set, it turns out India is now the 5th largest exporter of digitally delivered services. They total $227 billion in 2022. That's nearly 6% of the Indian economy, and most importantly, rising fast. It grew, just to get the figure correct, 28% last year and nearly doubled over the last 3 or 4 years. So clearly there is a lot of value from India exporting digital services. And of course, your study, sir, covers the impact on imports as well. I do want to note that we've run over, but I want to thank you, Dr. Gopalakrishnan, and Christina as well for sharing this summary and insights. I'll share with all of our members a copy of the presentation as well as the report. I also want to thank BN Vivek from Katan & Company for the earlier presentation on GST taxes on online gaming. And finally, I will share that in our next month's e-commerce working group meeting, hopefully we'll have the delegation from the US TR to the WTO talk about recent activities in the WTO around this very important issue. So with that, let me wish everyone a good evening for our colleagues in India and beyond, and a good morning for those in the United States. Thank you all, and really appreciate your time and interest. And do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, or would like to be connected with any of the speakers here. Goodbye for now. Stay warm and dry.
Thank you very much.
Stay cool and dry, depending on where you are. Bye now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you.